My name is Allison Mercer, and the day that changed my life forever was August 12, 2014. I'll never forget that date. Not just because I technically died that day, but because it was the moment Jesus spoke to me in a way I had never thought possible. I was a school counselor at a local high school in Cedar Falls, Iowa, married to my husband Daniel, a nurse at the regional hospital, and together we were raising our daughter, Grace. Life had always been busy and full of responsibilities. Work, family, grocery shopping, homework, church on Sundays. And if I'm being honest, I never thought much about the specifics of prayer. I prayed, of course. I believed in God. I had faith, or at least I thought I did. But it was the kind of faith you carry like a purse, something you have, something you use when you need it, but not something you're gripping onto like a lifeline. That morning had started like any other. I got Grace ready for school, kissed Daniel goodbye, and headed off to work. I remember the smell of my coffee and the buzz of my phone. I remember the clouds in the sky. I remember the ache in my chest that came suddenly and without warning. I thought it was anxiety. I'd had panic attacks before, I knew the feeling, but this one kept intensifying, growing into something heavy, something unbearable, like someone pressing down on me with the full weight of the world. The next thing I remember was the panic in my coworker Rebecca's voice as she called for help. The way her words sounded like they were coming through a tunnel, muffled and far away. Then darkness. A strange kind of silence. Not sleep. I wasn't unconscious in the way people usually talk about it. It was like my body turned off, but my awareness didn't. I was somewhere else, though I couldn't explain where. There was no light at first. Just stillness. I didn't feel fear though. It's hard to describe. It was like I was detached from everything, pain, time, gravity. And then all at once I was standing in a place that looked like light itself had formed, like you could breathe it in. I remember colors that don't exist in this world and a presence so strong and yet so gentle it made every cell in me want to fall to its knees. And then he was there. Jesus. Not as an idea, not as a thought, but in a way more real than anything I've ever experienced. He didn't look exactly how artists paint him, and yet I recognized him instantly. There was no doubt. His eyes met mine, and in them, I felt a kind of love I can't compare to anything. Not motherly love, not romantic love, not the pride of seeing your child succeed. This was different. It was holy. He called me by name, Allison, and the way he said it shattered every wall inside of me. I wanted to weep and rejoice at the same time. I didn't even think to ask why I was there or what was happening. I didn't have to. He knew. Everything I was, everything I had ever done, thought or feared. He knew it all, and he loved me still. Then he spoke again, gently, as if not to frighten me, but clearly. There are words you say when you pray that you must let go of. I didn't understand at first. Words. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, he said something I'll never forget. Many of my children speak to me in ways that sound humble, but they reveal fear instead of faith. You don't need to convince me to listen. I already am. I felt a warmth flood through me, but also a deep conviction. It was like looking in a mirror that finally showed you what you really looked like. He continued, and every word felt like it was being carved into my soul. There are 3 words I want you to stop saying in your prayers, Allison. I felt my breath catch, even though I wasn't breathing in the way I knew breath on earth. He looked at me with sorrow, not anger, and said, if only they knew how these words keep them from fully receiving my presence. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning. Was this really happening? Was I really here? He told me what the words were, and when he did, they weren't the words I expected. They weren't evil. They weren't cursing or blasphemy. They were words I used almost every time I prayed. Words I thought were respectful. Words I thought showed I trusted him. But Jesus showed me how those words actually revealed doubt. How they subtly suggested that I wasn't sure if God would come through unless I pleaded, begged, or added disclaimers to protect myself from disappointment. He showed me how many of us lace our prayers with hesitation, like we're trying to prepare for silence instead of expecting an answer. In that moment, I understood how little I really knew about faith. Not belief, not religion, not behavior, but faith, The kind that expects, that trusts without hedging, that speaks as though the thing has already happened because the one being asked is good. I wanted to fall at his feet, but my body didn't move in that way. There were no feet. No floor. Just him and me, and this truth that was breaking me and healing me at the same time. I began to see my whole life flash in pieces. All the times I had prayed with fear hidden behind my polite words. All the times I had begged instead of trusted. All the times I had asked as if I wasn't sure he loved me enough to say yes. And Jesus, with eyes full of compassion, showed me that he had heard every single one of those prayers. Not with frustration, but with longing. Longing for me to know I didn't need to fear. Longing for me to trust in his nature, not just his power. I realized then that prayer wasn't just about asking. It was about relationship. And I had been treating it like a transaction. Careful, cautious, afraid to disappoint myself or God. That's when he told me I had to go back. That my time wasn't finished yet. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go back to that body, that life, that world with its pain and chaos and noise. But I knew I had to. Because this message wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who had ever wondered if God hears them. Anyone who's ever prayed with shaking hope, not bold trust. And so, just like that, I came back and everything changed. I woke up in the hospital surrounded by wires and the frantic murmurs of doctors and nurses, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind was still with him. My body felt like it had been wrung out and set on fire all at once, but it was nothing compared to the flood of what I had just seen. Daniel was there, gripping my hand so tight it hurt, his eyes swollen with tears he didn't bother to hide. I remember how he kissed my forehead like he wasn't sure I was really there, like part of him had already said goodbye. The machines beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat, and the lights were too bright, and the ceiling felt like it was pressing down on me, but all I could think about were those 3 words. Jesus had spoken them with such tenderness and yet with a kind of authority that leaves no room for debate. He hadn't given me a list of commandments or demanded that I become perfect. He simply revealed what was already in my heart, the way I had been praying out of habit, out of fear, sometimes even out of desperation, instead of true trust. The first word was, just. I had never thought anything of it. Lord, I just ask that you help me. I just want to thank you. I just need you today. He showed me how that one little word, just, makes our prayers feel small, like we're trying to apologize for bothering him, as if we think our request is insignificant or we're not worthy of more. It's like we're downplaying what we really want to say. He said that word clips the wings of prayer. It doesn't make the prayer invalid, but it dulls its power. Jesus said to speak boldly, not timidly, to come as children who know their Father delights in them, not as beggars afraid to ask for too much. That hit me so hard. I thought I was being humble all those years, but he showed me it was really a kind of hidden doubt, the kind that dresses itself in politeness but carries fear at its core. And then there was the second word, try. That one shocked me. I'd prayed it so many times. God, I'll try to trust you. I'll try to be better. I'll try to have faith. I thought that was honest. I thought that was being real. But Jesus said to me with so much compassion, trying is rooted in your own strength. Trusting is rooted in mine. He said when we tell God we'll try, what we're really saying is, I'm going to do this on my own, and if I fail, well, at least I tried. It sounds good, but it keeps us in the driver's seat. Jesus wants surrender, not effort. He wants us to let go and admit we can't. Not promise we'll try harder. He said he didn't die on the cross so I could try. He died so I could be free. That moment wrecked me. I had been trying to be a good Christian my whole life. Trying to be patient, trying to be generous, trying to trust when things got hard. But that wasn't faith. That was striving. And it had worn me down so much that I'd started to resent prayer altogether. It's no wonder I felt like God was distant. I was too busy performing to actually receive. And then, finally, the third word. This one pierced me the deepest. If. Jesus looked at me with the kind of love that could melt stone, and he said, when you pray with if, You are opening the door to doubt. I didn't understand at first. He explained, saying, if it's your will is not always bad. I said it in the garden. But many use it to shield themselves from disappointment. They say, if not because they seek my will, but because they don't believe I will answer. That hit me like a freight train. I thought of all the times I had ended my prayers with, if it's your will, as a way to give God an escape clause, or maybe give myself one. That way, if nothing happened, I could tell myself it just wasn't meant to be. But Jesus showed me how I had been praying with one foot in and one foot out. Not fully trusting, not fully asking, not fully believing. I was hedging my bets. I thought I was surrendering, but I was actually protecting myself from pain. And God can't move through a prayer that's half faith and half fear. He wants all of us, our hopes, our hurts, our total surrender. After he showed me those 3 words, everything inside of me began to unravel and reform. It was like my soul was being rewired. Even as I lay there in that hospital bed, surrounded by the sound of machines and the quiet sobs of my husband, I knew I could never pray the same way again. I wasn't even sure I could live the same way again. I started whispering prayers right there. Prayers without those words. Not because they were magic, but because I understood now that my heart had to change. Father, thank you for being with me. I believe you are healing me. I trust you. It felt different. Stronger. More real. It was like there was no distance anymore between me and him. Like he was closer than the air. I didn't need to beg. I didn't need to perform. I just needed to believe. And that belief, that faith, filled the room in a way I can't explain. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder. No visions. Just peace. But that peace was more powerful than anything I'd ever felt. It was the presence of Jesus. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this message wasn't just for me. It was for every person who had ever felt like they were praying wrong, or not enough, or that God was distant. It was for the mother who prays for her child through tears every night. The teenager who thinks God doesn't care about them. The man who gave up praying because he thought nothing would change. Jesus wanted them to know. He's listening. And he wants them to speak not with fear, but with faith. The recovery was slow, but the shift inside me was immediate and irreversible. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before, even if I had tried. Something in me had been rewritten, not just emotionally, but spiritually. I would lie in that hospital bed with tubes in my arms and bruises on my chest from CPR, but inside, I felt more alive than I ever had. Every breath felt like a gift. Every blink, every whisper of air through my nose. It was all sacred. I stopped trying to rush my healing. I stopped worrying about how long it would take before I could go back to work or clean the house or make dinner again. I knew none of that mattered compared to what I had been shown. My husband Daniel would sit by my bed for hours, just holding my hand, and eventually, I started to talk. Not about what happened at the hospital. Not right away, but about prayer. I started telling him about the 3 words. At first, he just listened, nodding slowly like he was trying to take it all in. But then one night, I saw tears in his eyes. Daniel had always been strong, the kind of man who holds things in, who keeps moving even when everything feels like it's falling apart. But I saw that crack in him now. I've prayed like that, he whispered. So many times. I've said all those words. And I reached for his hand and said, so did I. But we don't have to anymore. That was the moment it started to become real outside of myself. When I saw that this message was already working in someone else's heart. We began to pray together every morning. It wasn't long. Sometimes just a few minutes before the nurse came in or before the breakfast tray was delivered. But we stopped using just, try, and if. We stopped apologizing in our prayers. We stopped pretending we had to earn the right to ask for things. We prayed boldly, the way Jesus had shown me. Thank you, Lord, that you are healing Allison. We believe you are working in this. We trust you because you are faithful. And something shifted in the room. It's hard to describe, but there was this sense that heaven was leaning in. The doctors began to use words like miraculous and unexpected progress. I didn't care about the science of it. I knew it was God. I knew He was moving. And not just in my lungs or my heart, but in our faith. Daniel started reading his Bible again. He would sit there while I slept, whispering verses out loud. One day, I woke up to him praying over me, his hand on my arm, his voice trembling but firm. "You're going to get through this," he said. "God is not done with you." And I believed it, not because I needed to but because I had seen Him. I had heard His voice. And His presence had changed everything. But it didn't stop with just us. The nurses started to notice something different in the room. One of them, her name was Tasha, pulled me aside one morning and said, "I don't know what it is, but your room feels peaceful. Even on the worst days." I told her why. I told her about Jesus. I didn't preach. I just shared. I told her about the words, about how Jesus wanted us to come to Him boldly, with childlike faith, not fear. And her eyes welled up with tears. "I say those things in every prayer," she said. "Every single one." I reached for her hand and said, "So did I. But it's okay. He doesn't condemn us. He just wants us to come closer." And right there in a sterile hospital room, Tasha bowed her head and whispered a prayer without try, without if. And she cried. Not out of guilt but out of freedom. That's when I realized the ripple effect had started. This message was meant to be shared. By the time I was strong enough to go home, our entire household had changed. My kids didn't know every detail of what had happened, but they knew something was different in Mom. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't short-tempered or distracted or weighed down by worry like I used to be. I laughed more. I listened longer. I started doing this thing where every time one of them talked to me, whether it was about school or a video game or what they wanted for lunch, I would look them straight in the eyes and say a silent prayer in my head. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for their voice. Don't let me miss this. I had missed so much before. I had been alive but not living. And now everything, even washing dishes or folding laundry, felt like an opportunity to be present. My prayer life became the heartbeat of my day. And the most radical part was how different it felt to talk to God. I wasn't filtering my words through insecurity or caution anymore. I wasn't approaching Him like a beggar hoping for scraps. I came boldly, just like He told me to. There were still moments of fear, of course. I had to go back for checkups and scans, and sometimes those waiting rooms would pull me back into anxiety. But even in those moments, I would close my eyes and remember what Jesus looked like when He said, "Speak to me in belief." His voice was soft, but it held the weight of all creation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an invitation. A reminder that I was His daughter. That I was allowed to trust Him fully. One morning, as I sat with my Bible in my lap, I remembered something else He said in that place between life and death. He said, "When my people speak with doubt, they give darkness room to listen." That shook me. I hadn't thought of it that way before, that our words weren't just prayers sent upward, but also declarations that echo in the unseen. When I said things like, "Lord, if you can heal me," or "just try to help me," I wasn't only doubting Him, I was letting fear and darkness linger nearby. But when I declared, "You are my healer, and I trust you with this completely," I was slamming the door on fear and swinging it wide open to faith. I started writing those kinds of declarations down on sticky notes and placing them all over the house. On the bathroom mirror, "God is for me, not against me." On the refrigerator, "He is my provider." In the car, "I do not walk alone." It wasn't superstition. It was spiritual alignment. Every word mattered. Not because I was trying to earn blessings, but because I was choosing to agree with heaven. And once I started doing that, the strangest thing happened. People began reaching out to me. Old friends I hadn't talked to in years were sending messages, saying they'd heard about what happened. Some said they'd felt lost and didn't know how to pray anymore. Others said they'd given up on prayer altogether. I didn't send them long sermons or theological debates. I just told them what Jesus showed me. I told them to remove just, try, and if from their prayers, and to start speaking with trust. Some were skeptical. I expected that. But over time, those same people started sending me their own testimonies. One woman, a former coworker, said she'd been praying for her son to get clean from drugs for over a year. But after changing the way she prayed, from Lord, please try to reach him, to Lord, I believe you're already working in him, she saw things shift. He reached out a week later, asking for help. Was that coincidence? Maybe to some. But not to her. Not to me. We knew it was God responding to bold faith. The words we speak in prayer shape what we expect, and what we expect shapes how we see God move. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about alignment. We were finally praying from the seat of trust instead of the floor of fear. And it made all the difference. The deeper I leaned into this new way of praying, the more clearly I began to see how prayer was never meant to be a monologue. It wasn't supposed to be me listing out needs or worries like I was leaving a voicemail on some divine answering machine. It was communion, a back and forth, a rhythm. And the more I cut out the clutter in my language, the more I could actually hear him respond. Not audibly like before, but in moments, in scripture, in stillness, in the random words of strangers that seemed to hit exactly where I needed it. I remember one afternoon, months after I'd recovered, I was walking through a local farmer's market. It was warm, the sun was peeking through the trees, and I felt this peace I couldn't explain. A woman I didn't know stopped me. She said, "Excuse me, I know this sounds weird, but the Lord just told me to tell you something." My heart stopped for a second. She looked me in the eyes and said, "He says you're doing it right. Keep speaking as if it's already done." I hadn't told her a thing. But I knew that message was for me. I went home and cried. Not out of fear this time, but out of overwhelming awe. It was like Jesus was still reminding me, still walking with me. That experience had changed everything. And now I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't go back to the way things used to be. Not in my faith, not in my habits, not in my prayers. I began writing about it, sharing little posts online, and before I knew it, I was getting hundreds of messages from people all over the world. Strangers. People who said they were tired of praying and getting no answers. People who said they'd felt guilty for doubting or afraid they weren't doing it right. I never claimed to be a preacher or theologian. I wasn't trying to start a ministry. I was just telling the truth of what I experienced. That Jesus cares about every word we speak, and not because he's judging us, but because our words carry spiritual weight. Every, just, we whisper like we're afraid to ask. Every if you can, that slips out like we're unsure if he's even listening. It adds fog between us and him. It doesn't mean he stops loving us, or that he won't move. But it means we aren't fully opening the door. I told people to imagine talking to a best friend but always couching everything in hesitation. "I don't know if you'll want to help. I'm not sure you can. Maybe you could try." Over time, that friend would wonder if you really knew them at all. That's what I believe happens in heaven when we come to God with prayers shaped more by fear than faith. Not that he pulls away, but that he waits. He waits for us to see him clearly, to trust his goodness. And when we do, oh, the way heaven moves. I heard stories from people who changed just a single word in their prayers and felt something break open. A man whose daughter had been missing for months messaged me. He said he stopped praying if she's alive, bring her home, and instead started declaring, "She will return to us in Jesus' name." 3 days later, she called. Another woman had stage 4 cancer. She'd been praying for healing with the phrase, "Just do what you can." But she switched it to, "You are my healer, and I believe you already are." 2 months later, scans showed the tumors had shrunk dramatically. Doctors couldn't explain it. She messaged me in tears, saying, "I think I was speaking with a lid on my faith. But now the lid's off." I didn't have all the answers, but I knew the one who did. And he wasn't afraid of our brokenness. He just wanted our belief. Not perfect belief. Not rehearsed prayers. But real, raw trust. I kept remembering what Jesus told me. Speak to me as if it's already done. That wasn't arrogance. That was alignment with what he promised. He already told us he hears. He loves. He moves on our behalf. So why do we pray like we're unsure of that? I realized something else too. Those 3 words he told me to remove? They weren't just random. Just. Try. If. Each one was rooted in fear. Fear of asking too much. Fear of being disappointed. Fear of assuming we mattered enough to him. But those fears aren't from God. They're from the enemy. They sneak into our speech, wrap themselves in politeness or humility, and slowly dilute the power of prayer. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. Not to me, not to the people I loved, not to anyone willing to listen. So I kept talking. Kept sharing. Because if Jesus could meet me on the edge of eternity, if he could pull me back and breathe that truth into me, then surely it was worth telling the world. And even if just one person prayed differently because of it, it would all be worth it. After all that had happened, my relationship with God was no longer distant or abstract. It was deeply personal. Every morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was speak to him with words full of trust and confidence, not doubt or hesitation. It felt like waking up in a new world, one where fear didn't hold the reins anymore. I remember sitting in my kitchen one quiet morning, the sunlight streaming through the window, and I prayed out loud, Jesus, I believe you're here with me. I trust you with this day. That simple declaration was a balm to my soul. Before my near-death experience, my prayers had often been a jumble of fears, uncertainties, and pleas to just try, or if it's your will. But now, each word I said was deliberate, spoken from a place of faith. I could feel the atmosphere around me change. It was as if I was no longer just whispering into the void but standing on solid ground, speaking to a Father who heard me fully and was ready to act. That kind of faith didn't come overnight, of course. It was a daily practice, a conscious choice to speak differently. Sometimes old habits crept back in, and I caught myself saying, if, or just out loud. But then I'd pause and remind myself what Jesus had shown me. I'd push those words aside like weeds in a garden and replace them with hope and certainty. There were nights when I felt scared or overwhelmed by what life was throwing at me. But even then, I chose to speak boldly. You are my refuge, I'd say softly in the dark. I will not be shaken. Those words weren't magic, but they were a promise I chose to stand on. And over time, that promise became stronger than my fears. One thing I never expected was how this new way of praying would affect my relationships. I became more patient, more present with my family and friends. It was like the confidence I found in God gave me the courage to be fully myself around them, without pretending or holding back. I started to share my story openly, not to gain sympathy, but because I wanted people to know that God was real and active in their lives, too. I remember a particular moment when my sister, who had always been skeptical about faith, asked me how I had changed so much. I told her everything. The near-death experience, the meeting with Jesus, the words he shared about prayer. She listened quietly, then said, maybe I've been holding back in my prayers too. That conversation was a turning point. It reminded me that the power of prayer isn't just in the words we say, but in the courage to believe they can move mountains. Over the months that followed, I saw God's hand in countless small moments. Doors opening when they seemed locked, peace washing over worries that felt unbearable, miracles that defied explanation. I never wanted to take any of it for granted. I journaled every answered prayer, every moment of breakthrough, as a way to remind myself that faith was alive and working. I also learned that faith wasn't about perfection or always knowing the right words to say. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and choosing to trust even when the path ahead was unclear. Jesus had shown me that prayer was a conversation, not a checklist, and that he was always listening, ready to respond when we speak with belief. As I share this testimony with you, my hope is that you too will find the courage to pray boldly, to remove the words that limit your faith, and to open your heart fully to God's power. Because when you do, you will find a strength you never knew you had, a peace that passes understanding, and a love that never lets go. As time went on, the change in my life wasn't just internal. It started to spill over into everything I did. My work, my relationships, even how I faced everyday challenges took on a new light. I worked as a nurse, a job that had always been physically demanding but emotionally taxing, especially when dealing with patients in critical conditions. Before my near-death experience, I carried the weight of every difficult case on my shoulders, often feeling helpless and exhausted. But after that encounter with Jesus, something inside me shifted. I started to pray for my patients differently, not just hoping for their recovery with tentative words but declaring healing and peace with bold faith. It wasn't about pretending that every outcome would be perfect, but about trusting that God was present in every moment, no matter how uncertain things seemed. There was this one patient, an elderly man battling severe pneumonia, who wasn't expected to make it through the night. I remember sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, and praying with a confidence I hadn't known before. Jesus, you are the healer. I believe in your power to restore him. The next morning, his condition stabilized against all odds. I didn't tell anyone at work about the prayer or the near-death experience that had changed me, but inside, I felt this quiet reassurance that God was working through me. Sharing my testimony publicly was something I had only recently started to feel ready for, and I knew it was important to do so not just for me but for others who might feel lost or doubtful in their faith. I received messages from strangers who said my story gave them hope during their darkest hours. Mothers praying for sick children, people battling addiction, those wrestling with loneliness. Many reached out to say they felt encouraged to believe again. Each message was a reminder that God's love and power aren't limited by circumstances or words. They are boundless and reach into every broken place. At home, my family noticed the peace that had settled in me. My husband, John, and our 2 children were my biggest supporters. They saw the transformation in how I approached life, and we began praying together as a family with a new sense of purpose and unity. We removed the if and just from our prayers, and the atmosphere at home felt lighter, more hopeful. The simple act of speaking prayers with faith instead of hesitation became a powerful tool in our daily lives. Even on tough days, when challenges came knocking, we stood firm on the promises of God. I remember one afternoon when my daughter came home from school upset about a fight with a friend. Instead of offering quick, uncertain words of comfort, I prayed aloud with her, God, you are our protector and healer of broken hearts. We believe you will restore this friendship and bring peace. The next day, her friend reached out to apologize, and the 2 began to rebuild their bond. These small miracles weren't flashy or dramatic, but they were real, tangible signs that faith spoken with confidence moves heaven and earth. This journey also taught me the importance of vulnerability. I realized that sharing my fears, doubts, and struggles with God, without sugarcoating or minimizing them, was part of true faith. Jesus didn't expect perfection from me. He wanted authenticity. And in that authenticity, I found a deeper connection. Not just with him but with myself and others. My near-death experience had opened my eyes to the reality of heaven and the profound love God has for us. But it also showed me that the way we speak matters. Words can build walls or tear them down. They can dim faith or ignite it into a blazing fire. So I encourage anyone listening, whether you're new to faith or have walked this path for years, to examine your prayers. Are you speaking with faith and expectancy, or are you holding back with words rooted in fear? Removing those subtle barriers can change everything. Jesus showed me that when we pray boldly, with hearts wide open, miracles happen. Not always the way we expect, but in the way that's best for us. And that's the beauty of a God who loves us perfectly. He works all things for our good, even when the answers don't come on our schedule. I'm sharing my story now, hoping it will inspire you to experience that same transformative power. Don't be afraid to speak to God as if it's already done. Trust that He's listening and moving. You are never alone. You are deeply loved. And your prayers have power beyond what you can imagine. One of the most humbling lessons I learned through this journey was how often we underestimate the power of simple, sincere words spoken from the heart. Before my experience, I thought my prayers had to be perfect, filled with flowery language or the right phrases to be heard. But Jesus showed me that what truly matters is the faith behind the words, not their complexity. Sometimes, the most powerful prayers are the simplest ones, spoken with unwavering trust. I remember during a particularly difficult season, when my father was hospitalized and his condition was grave, I sat at his bedside and felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on me. My hands trembled as I clasped his, and tears filled my eyes. In that moment, I found myself repeating a single prayer over and over. Jesus, please be with him. Heal him, Lord. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate promises, just a humble plea from a daughter's heart. Later, when my father pulled through against all odds, I knew without a doubt that those honest words had been powerful because they were rooted in pure faith. That experience taught me that God isn't concerned with the grandeur of our speech but the sincerity of our hearts. And that sincerity breaks down barriers. Barriers created by doubt, fear, and hesitation that often sneak into our prayers without us even realizing it. Jesus' message about the 3 words to avoid wasn't about condemning anyone but about opening our eyes to how language shapes our spiritual connection. It was a loving correction meant to help us pray more boldly and with greater confidence. He reminded me that faith isn't a feeling but a choice, to trust in His goodness and power even when we don't see immediate results. I started to notice how often I had been unintentionally weakening my prayers by using those words. Saying, if it's your will, or I just hope might seem harmless, but it subtly communicated a lack of trust in God's plan. Replacing those phrases with words of assurance, like, I believe you will, or I trust your perfect timing, transformed not only my prayers but my mindset. I became more expectant, more hopeful, and that shift brought peace like I had never known before. My faith became a light in the darkest moments, a source of strength when I felt weak and alone. It was in those moments of vulnerability and honesty that I truly felt God's presence wrap around me like a warm embrace. I learned to listen for His voice in the quiet, to seek His guidance in every decision, big or small. Prayer became less about asking and more about communing. Sharing my heart openly, listening, and resting in the assurance that God was always near. This new way of living also deepened my understanding of forgiveness and grace. I realized how often I had held on to grudges, bitterness, and guilt that weighed me down spiritually and emotionally. Through prayer, I asked Jesus to help me release those burdens and fill my heart with His love and mercy. The change was profound. I felt lighter, freer, and more able to love others without reservation. My family noticed the difference too, as did my friends. They saw a woman transformed not by her circumstances but by the power of faith spoken boldly. I often thought back to the moment when Jesus had gently corrected me in that heavenly place, teaching me about the importance of words in prayer. That lesson became a cornerstone of my faith journey, guiding me to live with intentionality and hope every day. Now, as I share my story with you, I pray that it resonates deeply in your heart. Whether you're struggling with doubt, seeking healing, or simply longing for a closer walk with God, know this, your prayers matter. Your words have power. And God is ready to meet you right where you are, eager to pour out His love and grace. Take courage. Speak boldly. Believe wholeheartedly. And watch as your faith grows and miracles unfold in ways you never imagined possible. Living through this near-death experience didn't just change how I prayed. It changed how I saw the world and my purpose within it. Before that moment, life felt heavy, filled with uncertainty and fears that I couldn't shake. I often questioned whether I was strong enough to face the trials that came my way. But after meeting Jesus and hearing His words about prayer, everything shifted. I began to realize that faith is not about the absence of struggle or doubt, but about trusting God even when those feelings arise. It's about choosing to believe in His goodness, His love, and His plan even when life seems confusing or painful. I remember one particularly hard day, not long after my recovery, when everything seemed to be falling apart all at once. My car broke down, work was stressful, and I was feeling overwhelmed with worry about my family's future. I felt tempted to give in to despair, to let fear take over. But instead, I sat down quietly, closed my eyes, and prayed with a new kind of confidence. God, I don't understand what's happening, but I trust you. Please guide me through this. That prayer was different. It wasn't full of doubt or what-ifs. It was a surrender to God's loving control. And slowly, as the day went on, I began to notice little signs of hope. A call from a friend offering support, a solution to my car problem, peace settling over my heart. Those moments reminded me that God is faithful, even when we can't see the full picture. I also began to understand that faith is a journey, not a destination. It's okay to have moments of weakness or confusion. What matters is that we keep turning to God, keep speaking prayers of trust and hope. My near-death experience taught me that God meets us in those moments, drawing us closer, teaching us, and strengthening us. Sharing this story publicly has been both humbling and healing. I've had the privilege of hearing from so many people who have faced their own battles with faith, fear, and prayer. Some have shared how my testimony encouraged them to let go of limiting words in their prayers and to embrace a deeper trust in God's plan. Others have told me how hearing about Jesus' gentle correction helped them see their relationship with God in a new light. Less about rules and more about love and connection. That is the heart of my story. That God's love is patient, kind, and always working for our good. He wants us to come to Him with boldness, not hesitation. He wants us to believe in His power to heal, to restore, and to transform every part of our lives. I'm grateful for the chance to walk this path of faith, to experience God's miracles firsthand, and to share that hope with others. If you are listening and feel weighed down by doubt or fear, I encourage you to take a step today. Begin to speak prayers without those subtle words that hold you back. Replace if and just with words of faith and expectation. Watch how your heart begins to change. Feel the peace that comes from trusting a God who is bigger than any problem. Remember, faith isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up and reaching for God's hand every time. And He is always there, waiting to catch you, to carry you, and to lead you into the fullness of life He promises. I believe with all my heart that your story is not over yet. God is writing the next chapters, filled with hope, healing, and new beginnings. Trust Him. Speak boldly. Live fully. And watch as your faith unfolds into a beautiful testimony of God's unending love. As the days turned into months and then years, I realized that my near-death experience wasn't just a moment in time. It was the beginning of a new life. One where faith wasn't just a word or a ritual but the very foundation on which I built everything. I started seeing God's hand in the smallest details, from the kindness of strangers to the beauty of a sunset that reminded me of His promises. My relationships with my family and friends grew deeper because I approached them with a heart full of grace and understanding, knowing how precious life truly is. The fear and anxiety that once clouded my mind slowly melted away, replaced by a profound peace that carried me through even the toughest days. I remember one evening, sitting with my mother, sharing the story of what I had experienced and how it changed me. She held my hand tightly, tears in her eyes, telling me how proud she was of the strength and faith I had found. That moment made me realize that my story wasn't just about me. It was about inspiring others to find hope in their darkest hours. I began volunteering at my church, speaking with others who were struggling to believe or feeling lost in their spiritual journeys. Hearing their stories reminded me of how universal the struggles of faith can be, and how much we all need reminders of God's love and power. I also started journaling more, capturing the prayers that once felt weak and uncertain and transforming them into declarations of trust and hope. Those writings became a roadmap of my spiritual growth and a testimony to God's faithfulness through every trial. Through it all, I never forgot the lesson Jesus taught me about the 3 words to avoid in prayer. It became a daily practice to check my heart and my words, striving to come before God with boldness and confidence. And when I faltered, when old doubts crept in, I would remind myself that faith is a choice I can make anew every morning. Looking back now, I understand that my near-death experience was not just about meeting Jesus but about learning to live for him every single day. It's about embracing the power of prayer, the strength of faith, and the incredible peace that comes from trusting God's perfect plan. If you're listening and feel distant from God, unsure how to pray or where to begin, I want to encourage you to start small. Speak from your heart, trust in his love, and watch as your faith grows stronger with each step. God is waiting to meet you, to fill you with his peace, and to lead you into a life beyond anything you could imagine. Your prayers are powerful, and your story is just beginning. Thank you for listening to my testimony. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear the message of hope and faith. And don't forget to comment below with your own stories or prayer requests. I would love to pray with you. Remember, God loves you, he is with you, and he is always listening. Keep speaking boldly, keep believing, and keep walking in his light.